So Mohammed will be taking us away, and given our comms issues right now, I'm just going to hand straight over to Mohammed and ask Adam to give Mohammed the thumbs up that we're good to go. And Mohammed, you take it away, let's get going.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining today's session. I'm Faz. I'm a senior developer advocate at Amazon Web Services. And I'm someone who's been in this industry for over 17 years. I've actually been working. I started as a backend engineer and then grew my career, went into solution architecture, and also led a lot of teams, especially a very recent one was when I led teams to migrate into the AWS cloud. And then I joined AWS in 2019. Been a solution architect over there and a recent senior developer advocate. I'm also a community builder. I build and help and mentor a lot of communities, tech communities in ASEAN and in MENA. So that's something I'm very passionate about. This actually behind over here. This is actually from Dubai, which is where I'm based out of right now. And this is a photo from the 80s because I've been born and brought up over here is something I always show to people about how I've been moving throughout my career and my life in general. I was in Malaysia for like 6 years and then came back to Dubai. So I'm back over here. And one of the things I also do is I mentor in technical leadership and building a career in tech. Now, the thing is, over the years, there's been a lot of change in how things have been built, right? Of how apps are being built. And one of the things you will always see is that modern applications these days, it was easy back in the day, right? 2005, when I got started, I was a Java developer. I was doing a lot of things, basic things in Java. I started with struts. The term which you call full stack developer, I mean, we used to do that ages before. HTML and JavaScript used to be secondary citizens at those point in time. It was all about the database. It was all about making sure your query is coming in. So I'm not sure if it's why the echo is there. Just give me a second. Yeah. So one of the things with these kind of apps is that you initially, at least like 15, 16 years ago, the whole idea of these apps were to actually just get data and then push it out, right? Basic CRUD apps. But over the years, the way startups have been built and the way things have actually worked over the years with applications and the kind of uses that it's being used, you see these kind of requirements coming up these days, especially in 2022. If you actually want to build an app as a modern application, these are a couple of things that you would need to actually look at. So one of the things is, I'm just looking at the chat because there's some stuff coming in. Just give me a sec. Is my audio all right? Right. Okay. Got it. Let me remove it from the camera then. I think that's better. Let me remove it from the camera. Should I remove it from the camera? Okay. Awesome. Let me just remove it from the camera. Okay. So I've removed one of the sources. It should be all right now. Sounds great. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. And you can see, I mean, with modern application, and you see this right now, right? Even doing remote stuff on it, there's a lot of moving parts behind the scenes. And building modern applications these days is also a challenge. So you want to make sure that your apps are being performant, they're able to scale better, they are pretty reliable, they're agile. You're able to use the latest and greatest of frameworks, especially if you're someone who is building the front end and the back end. And you also want to make sure as a developer, you want to avoid managing physical servers, right? The last thing I would want to do is, especially when in the old days I would build these applications, is that I would want to avoid touching a server, because I'm not sure if I run a command, something goes wrong and then it goes down and they'll say, okay, you're supposed to know how to do things, and I'm like, I'm just a developer, right? I'm building my own things. So you want to make sure that as part of modern application requirements, even how you manage the infrastructure also changes. And another thing is security, which is usually the most important thing these days, especially with the kind of news you keep hearing about vulnerabilities and securities and hacks and ransomwares and a lot of other things. So these are all the things that, as a developer, I want to, worry about. And I mean, I have to worry about and take care. But the thing is, in the end, let me see my slide. But the thing is, in the end, you want something to abstract you sometimes from this, because in the end, you just want to build your code. You just want to write your applications. So with AWS, we have a lot of services under the hood, right? So we have applications, especially for someone who has been using the AWS cloud. You may have used like our virtual compute services, like virtual machines like EC2. You may have used databases on RDS, for example, or maybe NoSQL databases like DynamoDB. You may be using data warehouses. You may be using S3 buckets for hosting your media assets, or files. And there are so many resources, and as a developer, you're just trying to, like, use those resources just to get your business application done. So this is where AWS built something known as Amplify. So Amplify is basically a wrapper, a set of tools and services that makes it quick and easy for someone to build front end and back end applications. And today's talk is going to be focused on the back end side of things. I'm going to show you how you can actually build a Python Flask app pretty fast. And we'll see that because I'm also on the clock over here, because I will have to have a hard stop. We will make sure that we're able to build something quickly with Python rapidly, and you can actually see how under the hood that's actually being built. So I'll show you that through the CLI, and also on the browser. So this is what goes into building an application. I think this is the baseline which we all want to agree upon, right? This whole idea of that you have these fundamental building blocks. You have to have storage, you have to have data, and then you have to also put authentication inside as part of this. Then you want to deploy your application front end and back end. So that's the deployment side of things. So this is kind of like where CI/CD would come in. You may have a pipeline somewhere, and you want to make sure that you're able to move things around, and also test them, right? And beyond that, once you actually have the app running, it's not like the app's just going to remain static, right? You may actually grow the kind of features that the app is going to be hosting. So you want to scale the app. You may want to add things like AIML. I mean, almost every app these days, if you see, they always have some kind of an AIML component where they may be calling an API, or they're loading a machine learning model, in on the client side, or behind for inference on the server. A lot of edge machine learning cases are coming in, especially on mobile phones. And you want to make sure that your application can also handle additional load, especially because if you're a startup, or if you're someone who's building a product that suddenly gets a spike in usage, right? Because maybe you ran some marketing campaign somewhere or somewhere else. You want to make sure that your app is able to handle all that traffic that's coming in. And you also want to make sure that even with all the scale that happens, you continue to keep extending the code base, right? It shouldn't come to a point where you're forced to like complicate the code, or you're forced to actually what do you call, like, rewrite everything together again later. So as much as possible, you want to keep it extensible, and at the same time also keep in mind the kind of architectures that you're going to build. We won't dive too much into the architecture side of things, but usually you would think about microservices, you would think about event driven architectures, but that's something that you can always put on as scale. So as much as possible, you want to get to that point versus actually handling everything before that. Right. So with build and Amplify, what it does is it provides you Amplify libraries. You can use this as part of the front end, and you can actually include this in your frameworks, in your JavaScript frameworks, whenever you're writing the front end code. The Amplify CLI, which is what we'll be focusing on today, this is a toolchain that allows you to configure and maintain your backend from your local desktop. You can also configure the cloud functionality and use the CLI interactiveness. So what will happen is you will see when we use the Amplify CLI that a lot of what is being built on AWS is being abstracted from you, because for you as a developer, you're just going to see, I want an API, or you're just going to say, okay, I want to have storage, some kind of storage available. So that's kind of like the things that you would want to focus on. And there are other things that we've added in recent years. One thing is Amplify Studio, which is a visual interface for your app backend. This allows you to actually create components in the on Amplify Studio, and then import that back into your front end page, and that would have some of the code from Amplify so that it can interact with the services better. And there's also static hosting, which under the hood uses S3 buckets, but Amplify hosting makes it much easier, because it adds on a CI/CD pipeline where you can then point it to your source. So you can connect this to your repo, like maybe a GitHub repo, and then use Amplify to then manage all of the deployments. Anytime you push code to GitHub, then that would trigger a build on AWS on the CI/CD pipeline, and then Amplify would then use that for static hosting. So you get the URL and you get the whole shebang over there. It supports modern frameworks also, such as React, Angular, and also SSR. It's something that came in very recently. And that's kind of like where you want to look at building with AWS Amplify. So you could one of the standard scenarios you would see is that you have the CLI, you use the CLI for creating the app, the backend especially, and then maybe some skeleton front end. I will be walking through a workshop that I've actually created, and I will share the link in the chat later, so you can actually follow these steps in your AWS account whenever you want to. So that workshop has the whole backend plus front end with the React app. We'll just be talking about just the Python app for today. And these are kind of the feature categories that you can do through the Amplify CLI. So you have authentication, you can bring in data stores and storage and API and functions. And we'll be touching on functions and APIs and also on storage, basically a database in this case. You can also plug in analytics and also AIML, so you can do predictions and interactions and a lot of other things as part of this. So let's talk about building the backend, right? One of the things you can do is with the visual user interface, you can actually, when you create those components, it will also create whatever code is required behind the scenes, and then you can use that. So you can use Amplify Studio to configure the data model, and then you can set up authentication, authorization, and also have a team collaboration over the UI. So you could actually have a couple of other team members involved, and they don't need to have an AWS account. That's the beauty of it. The whole idea is that you can include other people in your team who are just trying to configure and then work on the UI as much as possible. So this is what it'll look like. You can use the model data and relationships, and you will make sure that you can actually set up authentication, authorization. You have all these features behind on the left side, and that's what you would use as a way to add on to the apps. With the Amplify CLI, this is basically what we'll do. Amplify CLI and Amplify in general, it supports two kinds of APIs. One is GraphQL and one is REST. We'll be focusing on REST because GraphQL works only with JavaScript right now and TypeScript. The idea is that using the APIs, you can manage creating all of them just by answering some questions versus going in and then building it with through the UI or maybe using CloudFormation later, which is something you would want to move to. Like infrastructure as code is something you would want to move to eventually anyway. But this is a great way to get started quickly with AWS without going too deep into what are the different components that are being used under the hood. So what I'll do is this last bit is just UI development, but I'll skip this part and I'll go directly into the demo, and I'll just find out where my terminal is because I think I moved it somewhere. Just give me a sec. And I would probably need to zoom in as much as possible in this case. So if anyone is not able to see, just let me know, and then I'll try to readjust it again once more. All right, cool. I'll also paste this link to the workshop later. But predominantly, what I'm going to do is I have most of the CLI already installed. So that's, I'm not going to show you how I'm actually setting this up, but I'm going to start with an actual project, right? So if I go to my talks, and I have the talk for today over here, and from here, what's going to happen is I'm first going to create a React app, and that's basically because I want to have that app, and I'm not going to wire the API with the React app today, but that's something you can definitely have a look at later. So that's kind of like how it gets started. You can use create React app. Basically, that's what the React team has actually provided to just create a scaffold app over here. So I'm just creating one for car APIs in this case. So please zoom in. Okay, I'll zoom in more. Because I wasn't sure how I would actually want to move this thing. Yeah, let me just see if I could. Yeah, just give me a sec. Maybe I'll go into full screen better, and then I can move VS Code later. I've switched windows, but I think Video Ninja requires a couple of other things as part of this. Let me just see once this is done. And this would download like half the internet as usual. And basically, I have my car API over here. Okay. Cool. So I have the app, the car API app over here, and this is kind of like where you get started. So you can start with the standard React app using any of the scaffolding libraries that are available out there. And once I generate this, I want to now initialize Amplify as part of the setup. Okay, and as part of the setup, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use when I initialize it, it'll initialize it as an Amplify project, and this is basically what it's going to do. Behind the scenes, it's going to create a couple of folders and it's going to ask a couple of questions, and that's the settings that it's going to set. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly provide a name, like this is going to be just a cars API. It's going to use some default information. I'm cool with it. That's fine. I'm going to use an AWS profile which I created already. which is good. So this uses basically AWS credentials. So you will create an access key and a secret access key as part of your setup. If you're using AWS for the first time, or this is the first time you're actually seeing the cloud, one of the ways when you create an AWS account, what happens is that it allows you to create access keys and secret access keys, which can then rotate, delete, and then programmatically you can access your AWS account through this. And you can add a lot of privileges. And one of the best ways is to always have least access privilege for your accounts. So you could have one root account and then multiple access keys where other different people in your team or your organization can actually access that account. Under the hood, what's happening is we are Amplify is since Amplify is kind of like creating is an abstraction layer on top. It is actually creating a lot of the CloudFormation stack. So CloudFormation is basically our service which allows you to write templates in JSON or YAML. Infrastructure as code. Basically, you can define what resources you want to be created in AWS, and then you run it through CloudFormation, and CloudFormation then spins up everything for you. So it provisions whatever you need to. I'll just quickly check if there's any messages. No. Okay, that's good. Right. So now we have this project ready. So next step, what we're going to do is I'm going to add storage. So I'm going to add a database as part of this because I want to store my model. I want to store a car table in AWS in DynamoDB. So we have a NoSQL database service called DynamoDB that allows me to store NoSQL data. So as part of this, I'm just going to give it a very friendly name. So this could be, I'll just call it car storage because it's still use it internally between the resources within AWS. And then just for my simplicity, I'm just going to have a cars table. Now I'm going to add a couple of tables, a couple of columns as part of this. So as any standard record of a car, for example, I'm going to have an ID. And DynamoDB does not generate unique IDs. You will have to generate that as part of the code. But for the sake of today's example, we're just going to focus on keeping it simple. So I need a car name, and I'm going to keep that as a string. And you'll notice that as part of creating the whole database, this allows you to define or choose what are the different data types that can be used when storing that data internally in DynamoDB. But you can probably just keep everything as string also, and then manage all the manipulation within your code if needed. Cool. So I have the ID, I have the name, and last I'm going to just add a link to. I'm just going to add a link to the code to the car. So I'm just going to add a link, and this is going to be a string, and I don't want any more columns. I'm going to just use partition key as part of the setup. So a partition key allows you to group certain amounts of data together within DynamoDB, and it allows you to have faster read access. So I'm just going to use ID as a partition key for now, just to keep it simple. Do I need a sort key? No, I don't. And this is useful when you want to actually sort through data faster. Do I want global security secondary indexes? No, I don't. And no triggers this time, so I'm good with this. And this now kind of creates that template for me where I need to provision it. So now after this point onwards, every time I need to deploy anything to AWS, I can just use Amplify push. And what Amplify push does is it will use the configuration, basically the template that's been created by Amplify locally on your laptop, and then it provisions all those resources back into AWS. So once we are done with the database, then we'll start creating the API and the Lambda, and that's kind of like where you'll start seeing how I'm going to use Flask and then load that in a Lambda function. And then I'll switch to once we have it deployed, we'll switch to the console, and then you can see how things are actually moving over there. So just wait for this. I think it's still taking some steps. Let's just see. Oh, okay. I think this stretched over here. Okay. Right. And in the meantime, once it's doing this, I'll show you what happens behind the scenes. So that way you'll actually see that there's progress happening under the hood. shows that the CloudFormation stack is already up. Let me just confirm this, because API was just created right now. Right. So this is kind of like where we have our stack up and running. This is basically CloudFormation. So everything that I'm creating in Amplify under the hood, it will create it in CloudFormation, which basically means you can then extend it from here onwards afterwards if you don't want to use Amplify as part of the setup. So I have already, so I created the first one. Yeah, it's not pushed it yet. So I'll just see why this thing is taking time. Okay. Right. So if I do a push, it will actually show me what's the changes that's going to happen as part of this. And if you haven't made any changes, it's not going to do anything beyond that, right? So that's kind of like how it's doing. So this is where it's actually going to now start pushing it to the cloud. That's I think maybe when I was zooming in and out, must have messed up my terminal. Apologies on that. And we'll just wait for this to close. But when it does this, this is kind of like where you'll start seeing that a stack is being created. So this is basically a CloudFormation stack. And as part of the stack, it is creating all these different resources over here. So if I go in over here and if I see these are all the resources, it's creating a table in this case, and this is actually being created. And you can always go back and you can also fetch these logs in the CLI if you need to, and get an idea of, okay, what's actually happening behind the scenes and under the hood, how much time is it creating, how much time it's taking, and if actually something fails eventually also. So that's something that it'll take a bit for creating this for the first time. Right. So this part's done. Let's wait for this. And once it's completed, we can actually move on to the next step. All right, and it's uploading the files. Cool. Right, so now we have our database. I'll just quickly show you this over here. If I go to the resources, it shows that there is a database created. And that's my CarsDev database over here right now. No entries, but we're gonna change that in a bit. Cool. So next up, we're gonna actually add some code. So we're gonna add a API and a Lambda as part of this. So first thing, I'm gonna create an API and then we'll connect that to the Lambda directly. So to add an API, it's pretty straightforward. All I need to do is I just need to do. Let me just clear this so that you can see from the top. So I'm gonna add an API from here. And this is where you get a choice. So it's GraphQL or REST. And I'm going to just choose REST in this case. I'm just going to use a very simple name, which is going to be used internally. So it's just going to be car API. I want my path, the starting path, to actually look like /car. And that's kind of like where then within the Lambda, you'll see when we write the Flask code, how it's going to look like, right? Provide an AWS Lambda function. So I'm just going to call it car API for the sake of simplicity. And you can choose different runtimes. So Lambda is a serverless compute platform that allows you to write code and just give function, right? So you provide functions, and then as basically functions as a service, Lambda then loads that function for you, and then it executes based on a trigger, right? So something triggers it and then it executes. So it's a little pay-as-you-go model. You can have a Lambda sitting for years and then you're not paying anything on it. But once it triggers, then you're basically, it gets counted against usage in this case. So I'm going to choose Python because that's what we're going to be using. And you're going to see how we're going to add the Flask as part of the setup. Do I want to configure advanced settings? Yes, I would, because I want to provide access to my database. So that's what I'm going to do as part of this. And I'm going to edit the local Lambda function, but I will do that in my own setup directly, right? Separate. So, oh, okay. Did I just select no? Sorry, my bad. Let me just do this again. Just realized one of the options didn't pop up over here. Let me do this again. Sorry. So car API /car, and since it's just a configuration, right. Oh, do you want to add another path? No. Oh, right. Okay. Let me just add another one then. Just add a new path. Yes. add another path. Cars, Lambda function. So this one I'll just call it cars API. Go to Python. And do I want to configure advanced? Yes, this time yes. Do you want to access other resources? Yes, I do. That's basically where database is going to come. So I'm gonna select storage as part of this setup, because that's what I want, and I'm going to use CRUD. So I need all the CRUD API access in this case. Then what I'm going to do is I don't need any other functionality as part of the Lambda, so I'm just going to keep saying no. But you can actually use Lambdas to trigger, like batch jobs if needed. Do you want to enable Lambda layers? No. This is basically like a way to share packages across multiple Lambda functions. Do you want to configure environment variables as part of the setup? No, I'm good with this. And configure secret value. No, I'm good with this also. The no starts with an N. Do you want to edit the Lambda function now? No, but I'll open it in Visual Studio Code anyway. So that's kind of like, and I don't want to restrict the access. That's one of the things you can actually do through the API. You can actually restrict access in the Amplify also on the API, but we just want to keep it simple in this case. Right, so we have the configuration ready. So I'm just going to do Amplify push -y, and what this is going to do is it's going to then set up the whole thing. So it's going to create these functions, because I created one before, cars API and then cars API. So that's what's going to happen. So Amplify behind the scenes, because it's part of the project, and within this project I've created the DynamoDB table. It is also going to link that DynamoDB table to these functions, right? The one which is incorrect and the one which is correct, because what would happen is Lambda and any resource within AWS requires permissions to access any other resource or service within AWS. So what we would do is it will create the required policies between the services. So you are actually then abstracted from all of that, so you don't need to worry about it. All right, cool. So this would take maybe a minute more. And then what we'll do is we'll move into the backend. I'm going to then install libraries quickly. Whiskey and Boto3. Boto3 is the library for Python that you would use to interact with AWS. And then you'll see how, because to talk to DynamoDB, you would have to interact through the SDK. So Boto3 kind of adds a very clean layer on top to just call the database when you need to. And I'll just replace the code, and I'll also share the link later for the workshop, so you can just have a go at it anytime you feel like. Cool. Let's see. This would take time. Let me just quickly go over here and have a look. Right, so it's creating these things in progress. And if you notice, this is the first incorrect function. This is the one which I'm actually going to be using. As part of this setup, this is kind of like where you will have cars API. These are the resources. So it's created the policies, the access policies over here, the IAM policy as we call it, and also an execution role. And that's then basically where the Lambda function is created. All right, cool. So we'll just wait for the CLI to then complete and clear everything else, and then we are good to go. Okay. And we get a endpoint over here, which we're going to be using. So what I'll do is I'll just copy this and keep it. But by default, what's happened is it would have created a standard. Whoops, copy the wrong one. Just do this again. So it's this one over here. So car should show something. So this is basically what it's showing. It's a standard like hello world kind of a thing. And I have both because I have 2 endpoints now, so it's going to show me both, so cars and car, so both work, which is cool. So we'll just use this and continue. I'll just wait for this to complete. Okay, cool. This is just one of these days where my terminal isn't willing to cooperate with me. So what I'll do is, since it's already deployed, I can already see everything's already come over here. So I think we're good. So I should be okay with just doing a Control C and getting out of this. Okay, that's about it. Okay, let's see how it goes from here onwards. All right, so next I'm going to move to my backend, and you'll notice over here we have 2 of these. So I'm just going to go into Cars API because that's the one which I want to use. And I'm just going to open code in this case. All right, cool. So as part of the source code, this is basically what's going to be happening. I need to first install a couple of things. So I'm just going to do that in the terminal quickly so that I can then at the same time, once this is happening, I'll just go back to the code and I'll show you what's actually been created. So this is index.py, and all this is doing, this is actually dumping your Lambda function, the message we just saw in the browser right now. And as part of the setup, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add just going to replace this, and we're going to initialize the Flask app as part of the setup. And this is basically where the handler, the entry point for any Lambda function is going to be. So each language does it in a specific way. It has a specific function signature. In this case, we're just going to have def handler, and I'm going to add a base route as part of this. So now base route is going to be basically, it's waiting for that that slash car or cars in this case, and I'm going to just add that in. And all it's going to do is it's just going to do a get, right? So I'll just change this to cars, and it's going to do a get in this case. And because I'm not going to run this Python application locally, I'm not going to initialize the environment, but ideally, like, pip in and all, but ideally, you would do that if you want to just test this locally. And in my case, I'm just going to push this, and we'll see where it goes from there. This is now because the Lambda is already created. All it needs to do is it's going to just deploy this. So the only update it's showing is for the function. Everything else remains the same, which is pretty cool. And it's going to take all the dependencies because I've actually created. So it's going to bundle everything together and then upload it up. And we can just see over here what's happening. In this case, Amplify behind the scenes is using its CI/CD pipeline, and then it's deploying all of this. Yeah, why is it failing? Okay. And that's because of the function car API and not the cars API. All right, let's see how much more longer this will take. And we'll see if that change has gone through. I can see I'm actually on the dot also. How we good for time? Do I have a couple more minutes or okay. Okay, all right. Because I don't actually want to spend the time creating this. Stack update complete. Record.
Okay, just give me a sec. Let me just check this out. You may actually see me troubleshooting this in real time quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can delete this API quickly, so at least I can show this part. And the rest of this is something that can be checked later. Let me just see. Because if I delete the app and then I create everything again, it's going to take more time, which is why I just want to make sure that I'm just able to create and delete the actual API, which I'm sure I can. I just need to make sure. Okay, you know what? Let's just try this over here. Amplify console, which is not the plan to show, but since it's here, we'll just do this. Backend environments, deployment has failed. We'll go to the API, check what happened over here. Right, this one is fine. This one's okay. This is standard. This is on. Yeah. Okay. Let's do something. I'm just curious. Okay, let me do a push again once more and see what happens. No, ideally, you can actually go in and then you can change the CloudFormation template also under the hood. But I didn't want to like touch that right now. And we'll see if the Amplify CLI kind of picks that up and then continues with this. As long as it's able to upload the file, I think we should be good. Ideally, because since this is a zip file, we won't be able to check what's happening. Yeah, it's still the same in this case. I will just wait for this to happen. If not, then maybe what I could do is I'll just wrap this up. Right. Yeah. Okay. It's still failing because of this console. Right. So if I check, yeah, so this is going to delete all the resources. Okay, Amplify, API, remove. You want to remove, yes, yes. Okay. And because this is removed, now I don't have this, which is okay. Try creating this again once more. But I think we are almost closer to time. So I guess what I'll do instead is I will improvise. Apologies on that. I believe just having one typo is actually put me up on another path over here ideally. So I'll be sharing this link anyway later. The idea is that once I just put in a Flask app, and the idea is that I'm using Whiskey under the hood because for Flask it takes HTTP requests and it requires a Whiskey request to actually you continue functioning. And all we're doing is we're loading that within the Lambda. And as part of the setup, what I will do is once that app actually runs, I can then add my code inside, right? And it's just standard any Python code that you can use. You can then configure your routes directly inside this. So you can have your get routes, and then you can have your DynamoDB table as part of the setup. The key thing is, as part of using Amplify, what happens is under the hood, all of these things are being created for you. Like the whole provisioning is actually happening. So you're predominantly kind of like focusing only on writing the code, right? So in this case, you're just interacting with the resources like any other developer would, right? So you can then have all your data that's required. You can then put all your update functions and then your delete functions, whatever is required. And as part of that setup, it would actually keep it. In fact, I had another setup working and then I deleted it so that I could have a clean setup. I should have just kept that so that I could have done it. More apologies on that. The last step, which was not going to be part of the demo today, was to integrate it, right? So the whole idea that you would have your your front end also talking to the Amplify app, and it's just as simple as just adding Amplify inside and then just wiring up the API directly, and then you would then be able to view that data into in your actual UI. So that's kind of like how you want to see this working. So you would have an API, you can then call that API directly, and you're able to just use. So you can just take a Flask API that you already have, like smaller application, then move that. The advantage is that once you put it in Lambda, that's kind of like where you can start growing that application directly. So that's kind of like how you want to see this this growing. Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, so I'll wrap it up over here. I think I'm almost done. Thanks and apologies on that. I think that just one mistake on this one actually happened. I will share the link in the chat, and I'm happy to have the questions afterwards, and I can do it in the chat later. Yeah, thank you so much.
Technical issues. One was connecting the stream, 2 with getting the mic going, 3 with the actual deploy. And I think it's sometimes the most valuable part of a talk is to see the troubleshooting and figure out how we actually figure out what went wrong. So thank you for that. For this room, we'll break to coffee now. And thanks and well done again to Mohammed. Cheers all.